The Imperial House of Japan, the world's oldest continuing monarchy. Tonight, I have another quiet story to share with you. First, please turn the volume down a little and adjust it to a comfortable level. And if you think you may want to return tomorrow night, you may wish to subscribe now, so this channel will be easy to find whenever you are ready to sleep again. When you get into bed, thoughts about today or tomorrow may fill your mind, and you may feel pressure to fall asleep. But there is no need to force it. Simply let my quiet voice draw your attention away from those thoughts. You do not need to follow every word. Just let it drift by like soft background music. And if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly all right. Now, let us slowly begin tonight's story. In the center of modern Tokyo, surrounded by broad streets, office towers, railway lines, and the steady movement of one of the world's largest cities, there is a quieter landscape. Behind stone walls and wide moats stand the grounds of the Imperial Palace. Trees rise above the walls. Water reflects the sky. Bridges cross the moat at carefully chosen places, and gates open only when there is a reason for them to open. This is the principal seat of the Imperial House of Japan. The family that lives and works within this institution is connected to a line of emperors that Japanese tradition carries back into the distant world of mythology. Historical evidence does not take us as far back as the traditional stories do. Yet the documented line still reaches back many centuries, far beyond the beginning of most monarchies that exist today. The reigning emperor is Emperor Naruhito, the 126th emperor according to the traditional count. He came to the throne in 2019 when his father, Emperor Akihito, abdicated. With that succession, the era called Heisei ended, and the era called Reiwa began. The Japanese word for emperor is tenno. It can be translated as heavenly sovereign. The imperial family is known as the Koshitsu, the imperial house. Its crest is the chrysanthemum, a flower with many petals arranged around a calm center. The imperial throne is therefore often called the chrysanthemum throne. These names carry the weight of long tradition. But the role of the emperor today is clearly defined by Japan's post-war constitution. The emperor is the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people. His position comes from the will of the people, with whom sovereign power resides. He does not govern. He does not create policy. He has no powers related to government. Instead, he performs acts of state that are set out in the Constitution. These include formally appointing the Prime Minister chosen by the Diet, appointing the Chief Justice designated by the Cabinet, promulgating laws and treaties, convoking the Diet, receiving foreign ambassadors, awarding honors, and performing ceremonial functions. The advice and approval of the Cabinet are required for these acts, and the cabinet is responsible for them. This arrangement is modern, but it also reflects something very old in Japanese history. For many centuries, the emperor remained at the center of ritual and legitimacy, even when other people held practical political power. Regents, court families, military governments, and shoguns governed in the emperor's name. The balance changed many times, but the imperial institution endured. Perhaps this is one reason the history of the imperial house can feel both continuous and full of transformation. The ceremonies remain precise. The clothing may recall earlier centuries. The palace buildings and sacred rites may create a feeling of great distance from ordinary life. Yet the emperor's constitutional position is part of a democratic state, and the members of the imperial family carry out public, ceremonial, cultural, and international duties rather than political ones. They attend national events. They meet people from many parts of Japan. They receive guests from abroad. They visit places affected by disasters. They support cultural, scientific, charitable, and social activities. Their public life is formal, but it is also shaped by repeated efforts to stand close to the people, especially in moments of sorrow or national remembrance. As we begin this long story, it may help to imagine the palace at night. The traffic beyond the moat becomes a little quieter. Reliefs from the city lights lie across the dark water. Within the grounds are gardens, halls used for ceremonies, offices where schedules and official documents are prepared, and residences where members of the family live private lives that are rarely seen in full by the public. Across the centuries, the setting has changed from ancient Yamato to Nara, from Nara to Kyoto, and eventually from Kyoto to Tokyo. The political meaning of the throne has changed. The relationship between emperor and people has changed. The size and structure of the family have changed. But the idea of continuity has remained. It is a continuity made from stories, rituals, records, marriages, births, abdications, laws, and ceremonies. It is also made from the repeated act of looking backward while moving into a new age. So tonight we will move slowly. We will begin before written history in the landscape of myth. Then we will enter the earliest historical courts, follow the imperial family to Kyoto, watch political power pass to warrior governments, and return with the court to the center of a newly modern state. Later, we will come to the great transformation after the Second World War, and finally to the present family, living under rules that preserve ancient customs while raising difficult questions about the future. There is no need to remember every date or every name. You can simply listen to the movement of the story. From sunlight and sacred objects to palace corridors and poems, to military governments and modern constitutions, and at last back to the quiet moats of Tokyo. The traditional story of the imperial house begins not with a palace, but with the gods. Japan's oldest chronicles, the Kojiki, completed in the early 8th century, and the Nihon Shoki, completed soon afterward, preserve accounts of the origin of the islands, the divine world, and the ancestry of the imperial line. These accounts belong to mythology and sacred tradition rather than to verifiable political history. They were written centuries after the events they describe, yet they have had enormous importance in shaping the meaning of the emperor and the rituals of the imperial house. At the center of the story is Amaterasu Omikami, the sun goddess. In one account, the islands of Japan came into being through the divine pair Izanagi and Izanami. After a journey connected with death and the underworld, Izanagi performed a purification. From this act came 3 great divine children. Amaterasu was born from his left eye, Tsukuyomi, associated with the moon, from his right eye, and Susanuo, associated with storms, from his nose. Amaterasu became one of the most important deities in Shinto tradition. She was connected with light, order, the sun, and the imperial line. One of the best-known stories tells of conflict between Amaterasu and her brother Susanuo. Distressed by his actions, Amaterasu withdrew into a cave. With the sun goddess hidden, the world fell into darkness. The other deities gathered outside the cave and considered how to persuade her to return. They prepared objects, made noise, and created a celebration. A sacred mirror was placed where it could catch her attention. When Amaterasu looked out, drawn by curiosity, she saw her own brilliant reflection. The entrance was opened, and light returned to the world. The sacred mirror in this story became one of the 3 imperial regalia. A second treasure was a sword, associated with Susanoo, and later known as Kusanagi. A third was a curved jewel, the Yasakani no Magatama. Together, the mirror, sword, and jewel came to symbolize imperial legitimacy and the continuity of the throne. Later tradition associated the 3 treasures with virtues: wisdom, valor, and benevolence. The treasures are not displayed like ordinary historical objects in a museum. Their importance lies partly in their sacred character and in the fact that they are kept from ordinary view. According to the traditional account, the mirror is connected with the inner shrine at Ise, the great sanctuary of Amaterasu. The sword is kept at Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya, while the jewel remains in the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. In ceremonies, replicas may be used, and the rituals surrounding the regalia are marked by privacy and reverence. The idea is not simply that an emperor owns 3 precious things. The regalia represent the transmission of responsibility and authority from one reign to the next. According to the mythic genealogy, Amaterasu sent her grandson, Ninigi no Mikoto, down from the heavenly realm to govern the earth. He carried the sacred treasures with him. His descendants continued the line until Emperor Jimmu, remembered in tradition as the first human emperor of Japan. The chronicles place Jimmu's accession in 660 before the Common Era. Modern historians do not treat that date as verifiable history, and scholars generally regard Jimmu as a legendary figure. The earliest emperors in the traditional list are also surrounded by uncertainty, and evidence for many of them is scarce or absent. Still, the traditional date remains part of Japan's imperial calendar of memory. It marks the point at which sacred ancestry is said to enter the human world. In the story, Jimmu travels eastward from Kyushu toward the Yamato region, in what is now Nara Prefecture. The journey is a founding journey. It links the southern and western landscapes of the islands with the central plain where an early Japanese state would later emerge. We might imagine mountains appearing through morning mist, narrow valleys, wooded slopes, and communities separated by distance. But it is important to remember that such an image is only a gentle way of approaching the old story. The chronicles combine memory, mythology, political meaning, and sacred ancestry. They are not modern historical reports. The Imperial House recognizes a line of 126 monarchs, beginning with Jimmu and continuing to Naruhito. The traditional list therefore creates a bridge across more than 2.5 millennia. Historical scholarship draws the bridge more cautiously. Evidence becomes stronger only much later. The earliest written references to rulers in the Japanese islands appear in Chinese records, where the land was called Wa. Archaeological and textual evidence gradually allows historians to identify early rulers and the growth of the Yamato state. A clearly verifiable imperial line is usually placed in the early 6th century, with Emperor Kinmei often treated as the first emperor whose reign can be securely dated. This difference between sacred chronology and historical chronology does not make the older stories meaningless. It simply means that they belong to a different kind of truth. They tell us how the imperial house understood its place in the cosmos. They explain why the sun, the mirror, the sacred jewel, and the sword became important. They give religious meaning to succession. They connect the emperor with Shinto rites and with the ancient kami, the divine presences of Japanese tradition. In the modern constitutional system, official acts of state are secular. Yet imperial Shinto rites continue as part of the private and traditional life of the household. The emperor still performs ceremonies related to the seasons and the harvest. Offerings are made. The past is remembered through carefully preserved forms. So the mythic beginning remains near the surface of the modern institution. At an enthronement, when sacred objects and seals are transmitted, the ceremony belongs to the present day. Cameras, government officials, foreign guests, and modern schedules surround it. But the meaning reaches backward to the story of Amaterasu and the treasures carried from heaven to earth. This may be one of the most distinctive features of the Imperial House of Japan. It does not leave mythology behind as it enters history. Instead, mythology and history continue side by side, each with a different role. The historian asks what can be proven. The ritual asks what has been received. And the imperial house, across the centuries, has lived within both questions. As the light of legend gradually gives way to the clearer outlines of recorded history, the imperial court appears within the formation of the early Japanese state. By the 6th and 7th centuries, rulers in the Yamato region were strengthening their authority and developing institutions influenced by the great civilizations of the Asian continent. Contacts with the Korean peninsula and China brought religious ideas, writing, political models, artistic forms, and new systems of administration. Among the most important changes was the arrival and spread of Buddhism. Buddhism did not simply replace the older worship of the kami. Over time, Buddhist and Shinto practices developed together in a complex and often harmonious relationship. The imperial family could maintain its connection to Amaterasu and the sacred traditions of the land, while also becoming a patron of Buddhist temples, learning, art, and state ceremony. Empress Suiko, who reigned from 593 to 628, was the first of the historically recognized female sovereigns of Japan. During her reign, Prince Shotoku served as regent and became closely associated with the establishment of centralized government, diplomatic exchange, and support for Buddhism. Prince Shotoku is remembered for the 17-article Constitution, a set of moral and political principles rather than a constitution in the modern legal sense. The court looked toward Chinese models of government and culture, while adapting them to Japanese circumstances. This was a period in which the imperial center attempted to bring powerful regional clans into a more unified order. Titles, ranks, official posts, ritual systems, and written records became increasingly important. The ruler was not only a military or political leader. The ruler stood at the meeting point of religion, ancestry, law, and diplomacy. Emperor Tenji, who reigned in the 7th century, is associated with efforts to establish stronger direct imperial rule. The early state borrowed from the administrative example of China's Tang dynasty. Land, taxation, official rank, and the relationship between the center and the provinces were reorganized through reforms that developed over several generations. The court also became a place where the calendar mattered deeply. Ceremonies followed the seasons. Envoys arrived and departed. Media were written with increasing formality. Buddhist monks studied texts. Craftsmen created images and ritual objects. Members of aristocratic families learned how to move, speak, dress, and present themselves within a carefully ordered world. The emperor stood at the center of this world, but the center was not always occupied by a man. Japan's traditional list includes 8 women who reigned as sovereigns across 10 reigns, because 2 of them ruled twice under different names. These women were not merely the wives of emperors or temporary ceremonial substitutes. They occupied the throne in their own right. Empress Suiko's long reign helped establish a model of female sovereignty. Empress Jito, who ruled near the end of the 7th century, was associated with important developments in the state and with the establishment of Fujiwara-kyo, one of Japan's early planned capitals. Empress Geme presided during the period in which the Kojiki was compiled, preserving myths and genealogies that would become central to the identity of the imperial line. Empress Koken, who later reigned again as Empress Shotoku, became known as a major patron of Buddhism. During her time, a vast project produced 1 million small wooden pagodas containing printed prayers. These objects are remembered among the earliest surviving examples connected with large-scale printing. The reigns of female emperors remind us that the history of succession was once more flexible than the modern law allows. Later rules and customs increasingly favored male line succession. Confucian ideas about patrilineal order became more influential, and political families often preferred succession arrangements that strengthened their own position. The office of Empress Consort also became politically important, because the family of a consort could gain influence as the maternal relatives of a future emperor. But in the early centuries, the throne could be occupied by women of the imperial line, and several played significant roles in religion, diplomacy, historical writing, and administration. The Nara period, beginning in 710, placed the court in a capital designed on a grand continental model. Nara became the setting for large temples, official ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, and the growth of written government. The imperial family's patronage of Buddhism reached a visible height in monumental temples. Todaiji, with its great image of the Buddha, represented both religious devotion and state ambition. Horyuji, associated with Prince Shotoku, became a lasting symbol of the early Buddhist age. Within this world, the emperor's authority was supported by 2 great sacred traditions. From Shinto came the ancestral connection to Amaterasu, the regalia, and the rites of the kami. From Buddhism came ideas of universal kingship, moral order, merit, compassion, and protection of the state. The 2 traditions could overlap. A shrine and a temple might stand near one another. A court official might participate in rituals connected with both. An emperor might sponsor Buddhist worship while continuing rites that affirmed the divine ancestry of the imperial house. For a listener today, the details of early court politics can seem distant and complicated. Names repeat, capitals move, clans rise and fall. Yet beneath that complexity is a simple pattern. The imperial institution was learning how to become permanent. It did so through ceremonies, through written records, through sacred ancestry, through law, and through the creation of a court culture that could outlast individual rulers. A ruler's life might be brief. A political family might dominate for a generation. A capital might be abandoned for another location. But the throne was presented as something that passed onward. The mirror, sword, and jewel symbolized that passage. The chronicles recorded it. The rituals renewed it, and the court gave it visible form. Soon, that court would move again, to a new capital that would remain the imperial home for more than 1,000 years. The place would come to be known as Kyoto. In the year 794, Emperor Kamu established a new capital at Heian-kyo, the city that later became Kyoto. The city was laid out according to principles influenced by Chinese capitals. Broad avenues crossed in an ordered pattern. The imperial palace stood within a carefully planned urban landscape. Government offices, aristocratic residences, temples, markets, and neighborhoods formed a capital intended to express harmony and authority. Over time, however, Heian-kyo became more than an administrative center. It became the setting for one of the most refined court cultures in world history. The Heian period lasted from 794 to 1185. During these centuries, the imperial court developed traditions of poetry, calligraphy, music, clothing, architecture, gardens, ceremony, and personal conduct that would influence Japanese culture long after the political power of the court had declined. Life at court was governed by rank and season. Colors could be appropriate or inappropriate depending on the time of year. The layering of robes revealed taste and status. Handwriting conveyed personality. A poem sent at the right moment could deepen a relationship, repair an offense, or preserve a memory. A branch of blossoms, the call of a bird, the appearance of the moon, or the first snow could become part of a message. Court nobles competed not only for office and influence, but also for cultural distinction. The emperor was at the center of this world as a source of rank, ritual authority, and taste. Yet practical government increasingly came under the influence of powerful aristocratic families. The Fujiwara family became especially skilled at placing daughters in marriage with emperors, and then serving as regents for young rulers who were their grandsons. Through the offices of regent and chief advisor, Fujiwara leaders could govern without claiming the throne for themselves. This pattern is important. The imperial title remained unique. Powerful families did not need to replace the emperor. They could rule around him, through him, or in his name. The emperor's legitimacy was too valuable to discard. Meanwhile, the court's cultural life flourished. In 905, Emperor Daigo ordered the compilation of the Kokinshu, an imperial anthology of waka poetry. The collection helped establish Japanese language poetry as a prestigious literary form alongside the older tradition of writing in Chinese. Poetry at court was not separate from life. It was woven into communication. People exchanged verses in moments of love, separation, disappointment, celebration, and mourning. A poem might contain only a few lines, yet those lines could carry layers of reference and emotion. The Heian court also gave rise to remarkable prose literature. Murasaki Shikibu, a lady-in-waiting, wrote The Tale of Genji, a long work centered on courtly life, relationships, beauty, loss, and the passage of time. Sei Shonagon, another courtwoman, wrote The Pillow Book, preserving observations, lists, impressions, and sharp descriptions of the world around her. These works offer intimate glimpses of the imperial court, though they are literary creations rather than simple records. They show a society attentive to gesture, silence, fragrance, fabric, weather, and the emotional meaning of small events. Perhaps this is a good place to slow the story even further. Imagine a palace corridor in Kyoto at night. Screens divide one space from another. Lamps give a limited, gentle light. Beyond a veranda, a garden is barely visible. The sound of insects comes from the darkness. Somewhere in another room, a brush moves across paper. A short poem is being written before dawn. No one in that moment can know which words will be remembered 1,000 years later. Yet the court's devotion to language, ceremony, and beauty created a durable cultural inheritance. The imperial family's political position was not always strong. Emperors sometimes came to the throne as children. They could be influenced by regents, retired emperors, consorts' families, religious institutions, and rival factions. Abdication was common. A former emperor might continue to exercise influence from retirement, creating another layer of authority behind the reigning sovereign. Still, the court remained the source of titles and legitimacy. The emperor bestowed rank. The court preserved genealogies. Sacred rites continued. Even when real power shifted, political leaders sought recognition within the imperial order. Toward the end of the Heian period, warrior families became increasingly important. The Taira rose to great influence at court, and the Minamoto challenged them. Their conflict culminated in the Genpei War, after which the Minamoto leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, established a military government at Kamakura. This marked the beginning of a new political arrangement. The emperor remained in Kyoto. The military ruler governed from another city. The court retained ritual and cultural authority, while the warriors controlled land, armies, and administration. Japan would live with variations of this dual structure for centuries. The imperial court did not disappear when it lost direct control. It became, in some ways, even more clearly the guardian of continuity. The shogun might command warriors, but the title of shogun was granted in the emperor's name. The military government could issue orders and collect revenues, but imperial ancestry remained beyond its reach. The court's artistic traditions also continued to set standards. Poetry, ceremonial dress, classical music, court ranks, and ritual forms survived through periods of warfare, and political upheaval. Many details of modern imperial ceremony still carry echoes of this older, courtly world. The long robes, the carefully arranged spaces, the measured movement, and the formal language are not simply decorative. They belong to a tradition in which order itself has meaning. A ceremony says that the present is connected to the past. A garment says that the person wearing it occupies a place within a larger pattern. A poem says that a brief human feeling can be held in a form that outlasts the moment. And the imperial court, even when politically weak, continued to preserve these forms. The Heian world would eventually fade. Parts of the old capital declined. Buildings burned and were rebuilt. Aristocratic families lost wealth. Warrior governments gained confidence. But Kyoto remained the home of the emperor. For almost 700 years after the rise of the first shogunate, military rulers would govern Japan while the imperial family remained in the old capital, carrying out rites, conferring legitimacy, and preserving a sense of unbroken succession. The throne was no longer the place from which daily government was directed, yet it remained the place from which authority was made meaningful. The military government established at Kamakura in the late 12th century created a new center of power, far from the imperial court in Kyoto. The emperor remained the source of formal legitimacy. The court continued to grant titles and maintain rituals. But the shogun and the warrior administration controlled military affairs and much of the practical government of the country. This arrangement was neither simple nor completely stable. The imperial court had its own internal rivalries. Retired emperors sometimes tried to guide affairs from behind the throne. Aristocratic families continued to seek influence. Buddhist temples possessed land, wealth, and armed followers. The military government had to manage its own network of warriors, obligations, and competing loyalties. Yet the broad pattern endured. The emperor was sacred and dynastic. The shogun was military and administrative. One held a kind of authority that came from ancestry and ritual. The other held the force required to govern. The Kamakura shogunate lasted until the 14th century. Near its end, Emperor Go-Daigo attempted to restore direct imperial rule. For a brief period, he succeeded in bringing down the military government and establishing what became known as the Kenmu Restoration. But the restoration did not last. Conflict followed, and a new military government was established by the Ashikaga family. The dispute also produced one of the most complicated episodes in imperial history, the period of the northern and southern courts. For several decades, rival imperial lines each claimed legitimacy. One court was based in Kyoto under the protection of the Ashikaga shogunate. The other, associated with Emperor Go-Daigo and his descendants, was established in the south. Both sides possessed claims, supporters, and sacred authority. The conflict was eventually resolved, and the lines were reunited. But the episode showed that even an institution devoted to continuity could pass through division. The imperial line survived the division because both sides still believed in the importance of the throne. They disagreed over who should occupy it, not over whether it should exist. The Ashikaga shogunate governed from Kyoto and remained close to the imperial court, but the balance of power strongly favored the warriors. Later, as Ashikaga authority weakened, Japan entered a long age of conflict among regional lords. The court's material circumstances could become difficult. Imperial ceremonies were sometimes delayed because funds were limited. The emperor and the aristocracy lived within a city affected by warfare, fire, political disorder, and economic decline. Still, the court maintained genealogies and rights. It preserved the old titles. It continued to serve as the source from which ambitious warriors sought formal recognition. During the Age of Unification in the 16th century, powerful leaders such as Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi supported the court and received ranks and honors in return. Their authority was based on armies and conquest, but imperial approval helped place their achievements within the recognized order of the realm. Then, after the Battle of Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as the dominant military leader. In 1603, he received the title of shogun from the emperor. The Tokugawa shogunate would govern for more than 2.5 centuries. Its capital was Edo, the city later renamed Tokyo. The emperor remained in Kyoto. The distance between the two cities expressed the division of roles. Edo became the center of administration, military authority, and the political lives of the regional lords. Kyoto remained the city of the court, classical culture, and imperial ritual. The Tokugawa government carefully regulated the imperial household and the court nobility. It provided financial support, but it also limited political activity. The emperor's public role remained narrow. The court was expected to preserve ceremony and tradition rather than intervene in government. From one point of view, the emperor seemed secluded and powerless. From another, the very separation protected the throne. The shogunate handled taxation, law, foreign relations, infrastructure, and military order. It carried the burden of daily rule. The imperial family continued to stand above ordinary political competition, surrounded by a sacred and historical prestige that the Tokugawa rulers themselves respected. The shoguns were powerful, but they did not claim to become emperors. They governed in a system where the emperor's existence gave legitimacy to their own office. The Tokugawa period was also an age of great cultural development. Cities grew, commerce expanded, printing flourished. Theater, woodblock prints, popular literature, poetry, scholarship, and education reached wider groups of people. Among scholars, interest in Japan's ancient texts and traditions increased. Thinkers studied the Kojiki, the Nihon Shoki, early poetry, and Shinto. Some began to emphasize the emperor as the original and proper center of Japanese identity. These ideas did not immediately threaten the shogunate. For a long time, they remained part of scholarship, religion, and cultural reflection. But they created a language that later political activists could use. The emperor could be presented not merely as a quiet ritual figure in Kyoto, but as the true source of national authority. By the 19th century, foreign pressure made this idea more powerful. For more than 2 centuries, the Tokugawa government had limited most foreign contact. Japan was not completely isolated, but overseas trade and diplomacy were tightly controlled. Then, in 1853, American naval vessels commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry arrived and demanded that Japan open relations. The black-hulled ships became a symbol of a world that the shogunate could no longer keep at a distance. Foreign powers possessed modern weapons, industrial economies, and expanding empires. Japanese leaders feared that their country might suffer the kind of unequal treatment that other Asian states had experienced. The shogunate faced a crisis. Some people argued that Japan should resist foreign influence. Others believed that the country needed to learn rapidly from the West in order to defend itself. Many blamed the shogunate for weakness and confusion. A political slogan spread among activists: "Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians." The meaning of the slogan changed as events unfolded. The demand to expel foreigners eventually gave way to the practical need to study foreign technology and institutions. But the call to revere the emperor remained central. Young samurai and leaders from powerful domains began to present imperial restoration as the path to national renewal. The emperor, still living within the traditions of the Kyoto court, became the symbolic center of a revolutionary movement. It is a remarkable turn in the story. For centuries, the throne had survived by remaining apart from daily power. Now that very distance made it possible for reformers to claim that the emperor represented a purer authority than the troubled shogunate. The old court became the center of a new political future. In 1867, the young Emperor Meiji ascended the throne. The following year, forces supporting imperial restoration defeated the Tokugawa government, and a new age began. The emperor would leave Kyoto. The capital of the shoguns would become the capital of the empire, and the quiet symbolic throne would be placed at the center of one of the fastest national transformations in modern history. Emperor Meiji was born with the personal name Mutsuhito in 1852. He was still a teenager when he became emperor in 1867. The political revolution associated with his reign is known as the Meiji Restoration. The word restoration suggested a return to imperial rule, but the new government did not simply recreate an ancient system. It built something new. Leaders from the victorious domains reorganized the state, abolished the old feudal structure, created modern ministries, developed a national army, reformed taxation, established schools, built railways, encouraged industry, and sent missions abroad to study the institutions of other countries. The emperor became the public center of this transformation. For centuries, emperors had lived in Kyoto and appeared rarely before the wider population. Meiji moved east to Edo, which was renamed Tokyo, meaning Eastern Capital. He took up residence in the former castle of the Tokugawa shoguns. The change was rich in symbolism. The home of the military government became the home of the emperor. The political center and the imperial center were brought together. Emperor Meiji adopted a more visible public role. He traveled through the country. He received foreign diplomats. He attended ceremonies. Images of him in Western-style military dress circulated widely. At the same time, the new government emphasized ancient imperial ancestry and Shinto ritual. Modernization and tradition were presented not as opposites, but as two parts of national renewal. The emperor could appear in a Western uniform while remaining the descendant of Amaterasu. The government could build railways and factories while restoring ancient rites. Students could learn modern science while being taught loyalty to the imperial institution. This combination helped give the changes a sense of continuity. The transformation touched every level of society. The hereditary status system of the Tokugawa age was abolished. Former samurai lost privileges and stipends. A system of national conscription created an army drawn from the wider population. People gained new forms of mobility, although the changes also caused hardship and resistance. Land taxes were reorganized. Industrial projects were established. Telegraph lines and railways shortened distances. Foreign teachers came to Japan, and Japanese students traveled abroad. The state studied constitutions, parliaments, legal systems, military organizations, and educational institutions in Europe and North America. In 1889, the Constitution of the Empire of Japan was promulgated. Under this constitution, the emperor was described as sacred and inviolable. Sovereignty was located in the emperor, who stood as head of the empire and supreme commander of the armed forces. A parliament, the Imperial Diet, was created. A cabinet and modern ministries operated beneath the throne. In practice, much political power remained in the hands of senior statesmen and government leaders who acted in the emperor's name. The modern imperial system, therefore, contained another version of an old pattern. The emperor was presented as the source of authority, while ministers and advisors carried out the work of government. The difference was that the imperial institution was now much more visible and closely connected with the modern state. The family itself also changed. The Imperial House Law of 1889 established rules for succession and the structure of the imperial family. It limited succession to males in the male line. It also organized branch houses intended to help preserve the dynasty if the main line lacked an heir. For centuries, imperial families had used adoption and collateral branches to maintain succession. The modern law attempted to make the system more regular and permanent, though it also prohibited some older forms of flexibility. The chrysanthemum became an important state symbol. Imperial portraits appeared in schools and public institutions. National ceremonies connected people to the emperor. The Imperial Rescript on Education, issued in 1890, placed loyalty, family duty, and moral conduct within an imperial framework. The Meiji Emperor's reign also coincided with Japan's emergence as a military and imperial power. The country fought wars against Qing China and Imperial Russia, gaining territory and international influence. These victories changed how Japan was viewed abroad and how the state understood itself. The imperial institution became closely linked with national strength, military service, and expansion. This part of the history cannot be separated from the later consequences of empire and war. The modern throne had been designed to unify the country and support rapid development. Over time, the language of imperial loyalty would also be used within an increasingly militarized state. Yet Emperor Meiji himself remained, in many ways, a figure surrounded by formality and controlled public representation. Like earlier emperors, he stood at the center of a system that others administered. He died in 1912 after a reign of 45 years. During that time, Japan had changed from a domain-based feudal society into a centralized industrial state with a constitution, parliament, modern military, and expanding overseas power. The transformation was so great that the name Meiji came to represent an entire historical age. The next emperor was Emperor Taisho, born Yoshihito, the son of Emperor Meiji. His reign from 1912 to 1926 was shorter and was affected by his health. Political parties and parliamentary government gained greater importance during the period often called Taisho democracy. The imperial line, however, was secure in one important sense. Emperor Taisho had 4 sons. The eldest would become Emperor Showa, known during his lifetime outside Japan as Emperor Hirohito. The other sons established or continued imperial branches. The existence of several princes reduced fears about succession that had concerned the court during the Meiji period. But the modern imperial family was still shaped by strict law, military expectations, and the belief that members of the dynasty had special duties to the state. Male members often received military training and served as officers. Marriages connected the main line with branch houses and aristocratic families. Ceremonies became larger public events, supported by photography, newspapers, and modern transportation. The emperor was no longer a distant figure known mainly through rumor and ritual. He was represented throughout the nation. School children bowed before his portrait. Soldiers served in his name. Laws and official documents carried imperial authority. Public celebrations marked imperial occasions. The throne had moved from the protected world of Kyoto court culture into the center of a modern mass society. And with that new visibility came new power, new expectations, and new danger. The reign of the next emperor would encompass earthquake, political crisis, military expansion, total war, defeat, occupation, and the complete rewriting of the emperor's constitutional role. Emperor Hirohito was born in 1901 and became emperor in 1926. After his death, his reign received the era name Showa, and he is therefore known in Japan as Emperor Showa. His life stretched across one of the most turbulent periods in Japanese history. As a child, he was raised within the formal traditions of the imperial household. Like earlier heirs, he was separated from his parents at a young age and educated by court officials and tutors. His education combined imperial ritual, ethics, history, and military preparation with modern academic study. He developed a strong interest in marine biology, an interest that continued throughout his life. As Crown Prince, he traveled to Europe in 1921, becoming the first Japanese crown prince to make such a journey. The visit exposed him directly to foreign courts and modern political societies. When he took the throne, Japan was already a major power, with colonies, armed forces, modern industry, and a constitutional system centered on imperial sovereignty. But the political structure was unstable. Party government, military leadership, senior statesmen, court officials, bureaucrats, and economic interests all competed for influence. The emperor occupied the highest constitutional position, yet decision-making was dispersed among institutions that could act in his name. During the 1930s, military influence expanded. Japan pursued war in China and moved toward a wider conflict in Asia and the Pacific. The precise responsibility of Emperor Hirohito for wartime decisions has been the subject of long historical debate. The sources provided for this narration emphasize the dramatic transformation of his role rather than attempting to resolve every question of responsibility. What is clear is that the war was fought in the emperor's name, within a state that treated imperial loyalty as sacred. What is also clear is that the war ended in catastrophe. Cities were destroyed. Millions of people across Asia and the Pacific died. Japan suffered atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In August 1945, the emperor's recorded voice was broadcast to the population, announcing acceptance of the terms that ended the war. For many Japanese listeners, it was the first time they had heard the emperor speak. The voice came through radiostatic and formal language. The imperial figure who had been represented as distant and sacred entered ordinary homes through a modern machine. After surrender, Japan came under Allied occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur. There were demands that the imperial institution be abolished and that the emperor be tried. Instead, occupation authorities and Japanese leaders preserved the throne while transforming its legal meaning. A famous photograph from September 1945 showed Emperor Hirohito standing beside General MacArthur. The visual contrast was striking. The emperor wore formal mourning dress and appeared physically smaller beside the American general in an open-necked military uniform. The image symbolized a changed world. The pre-war imperial state had collapsed. The emperor would remain, but not as sovereign ruler. On New Year's Day in 1946, an imperial rescript rejected the idea that the relationship between emperor and people depended on myths of divinity and racial superiority. This statement became widely known as the Humanity Declaration. The ancient association of the imperial line with Amaterasu did not disappear from Shinto tradition. But the political doctrine that treated the emperor as a living god within the modern state was abandoned. The new Constitution of Japan came into effect in 1947. Its first article defined the emperor as the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, deriving his position from the will of the people with whom sovereign power resides. This sentence reversed the foundation of the Meiji Constitution. Sovereignty no longer rested with the emperor. It rested with the people. The emperor could perform only the acts of state specified in the Constitution, and he had no powers related to government. Cabinet advice and approval were required, and the cabinet assumed responsibility. The Constitution also renounced war as a sovereign right of the nation and established a democratic parliamentary system with protected civil rights. The Imperial House law was rewritten as well. The new law preserved male line succession but greatly reduced the size of the imperial family. 11 collateral branch families lost imperial status in 1947 and became private citizens. This change narrowed the official dynasty. Before the war, numerous princes and princesses belonged to branch houses. After the reform, the imperial family consisted mainly of the descendants of Emperor Taisho and a limited number of close relatives. The emperor's daily life changed from that of a sovereign at the center of a sacred state to that of a constitutional symbol. Public tours and meetings became increasingly important. Emperor Hirohito traveled throughout Japan, visiting communities and speaking with citizens. The language of the relationship also changed. People were no longer subjects of an emperor who held sovereignty. They were citizens of a democratic state, and the emperor's position depended constitutionally on their will. This was an extraordinary institutional adaptation. A monarchy that traced its authority to divine ancestry remained in place after total military defeat, but its legal role was reconstructed almost completely. The emperor opened sessions of the Diet. He received ambassadors. He performed ceremonies. He continued scientific research and imperial rites. But he did not govern. Over the decades that followed, Japan rebuilt its cities, expanded its industries, and became a peaceful economic power. The imperial household became associated with continuity amid change. Emperor Hirohito's long reign linked the pre-war empire, wartime destruction, occupation, democratic recovery, and post-war prosperity. That continuity was also uncomfortable. The memory of war remained. Questions about responsibility remained. Different people viewed the emperor's wartime role in very different ways. Yet the constitutional institution itself became widely accepted as part of post-war Japan. The emperor's public duties were quieter than those of a political leader. He attended memorial ceremonies. He met foreign guests. He visited regions of the country. He pursued marine biological studies. He appeared at annual events. The throne no longer commanded armies or issued policy. Its function was symbolic, ceremonial, and cultural. When Emperor Hirohito died in January 1989, his reign had lasted more than 60 years. Japan entered the Heisei era under his eldest son, Emperor Akihito. The new emperor had grown up during war and occupation. He belonged fully to the post-war constitutional order. Together with Empress Michiko, he would develop a more personal style of public service, one marked by travel, remembrance, and visible compassion. Emperor Akihito was born in 1933, the eldest son of Emperor Hirohito and Empress Nagako. His childhood was shaped by the formal expectations of the imperial household, but also by the upheaval of war. During the bombing of Japanese cities, the young crown prince was evacuated from Tokyo. After the war, he grew up within a country whose constitution, institutions, and understanding of the throne had been transformed. He was 18 when he formally came of age and was invested as Crown Prince in 1952. The following year, he represented Japan at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in London. It was his first overseas journey, and he visited countries in Europe and North America. The trip belonged to a new period of international re-entry for Japan. Only a few years had passed since the end of the occupation. The Crown Prince's presence at a great state ceremony signaled that Japan was returning to diplomatic life as a peaceful nation. Akihito also shared his father's interest in biology. He became known for research on goby fish and maintained scientific interests alongside his official responsibilities. But one of the most important events of his early life occurred not in a palace or at a diplomatic reception, but on a tennis court. He met Michiko Shoda, the daughter of a businessman, during a tennis tournament. Their relationship attracted enormous public attention because Michiko was not from the old aristocracy. When they married in 1959, she became the first commoner to marry the heir to the throne in modern Japanese history. The wedding was watched by a vast television audience. For many people, the marriage gave the imperial family a more familiar and approachable image. Michiko was well educated and had studied literature and foreign languages. Entering the imperial household, however, meant entering an institution governed by old customs, intense public attention, and strict expectations. Her experience was not easy. She faced criticism from traditionalists and pressure from within and outside the court. Her clothing, behavior, speech, parenting, and performance of duties were all examined. At times, the strain affected her health. Yet she and Akihito developed a family life that differed from earlier imperial practice. They took a more direct role in raising their children, rather than leaving most care to court attendants. They had 3 children: Crown Prince Naruhito, born in 1960, Prince Fumihito, later Crown Prince Akishino, born in 1965, and Princess Sayako, born in 1969. The image of the family eating, walking, or spending time together helped make the household seem less remote. When Akihito became emperor in 1989, the Heisei era began. The word Heisei was associated with the hope for peace, both within Japan and in the wider world. Emperor Akihito interpreted the symbolic role through sustained attention to remembrance and to the suffering of ordinary people. Together, the emperor and empress traveled throughout Japan. They visited all 47 prefectures and many remote islands. They attended national festivals, cultural events, ceremonies, and meetings with people from many professions and communities. They also visited places connected with the war. In 1995, the 50th anniversary of the war's end, they went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They traveled to Okinawa, where one of the war's most destructive battles had taken place. They visited Iwo Jima and other sites where Japanese and foreign lives had been lost. At memorials, they bowed their heads and offered flowers. Their words were usually careful and limited. The power of the visits often came from the act of being present. Emperor Akihito repeatedly expressed sorrow over the war and hope for peace. His approach did not settle every debate about history, but it made remembrance a central part of the post-war emperor's public role. The imperial couple also became closely associated with visits to disaster areas. Japan experiences earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, typhoons, floods, and other natural disasters. When communities suffer, political leaders and emergency workers have practical responsibilities. The emperor and empress cannot direct relief. Their role is different. They listen. They meet survivors, relief workers, and local officials. They offer words of concern. Their presence represents the attention of the nation. After the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake of 1995, they visited people living in temporary shelters. After the Great Earthquake and Tsunami of March 2011, they traveled to affected regions and met survivors in evacuation centers. They often sat or knelt so that they could speak with people at eye level. These images became important in shaping public understanding of the modern imperial role. The emperor was not above the people as a ruler. He stood beside them as a symbol. The distinction may seem small in words, but in practice it changed the style of the monarchy. Empress Michiko shared this work. She met children, older people, people with disabilities, artists, nurses, volunteers, and families who had lost homes or relatives. She also supported literature, music, and cultural exchange. Her background as a commoner and her visible humanity helped transform the image of the empress. Yet the pressures of imperial life remained. The institution expected discipline, privacy, and obedience to tradition. Every public appearance was prepared. Every statement was reviewed. Family events became national events. Personal choices could become questions of public duty. The marriage of their daughter Sayako demonstrated another rule of the modern imperial system. Under the imperial house law, a female member of the imperial family loses her status when she marries a commoner. In 2005, Princess Sayako married Yoshiki Kuroda and became Mrs. Kuroda. She left the imperial family and began life as a private citizen. The law did not apply in the same way to male members, whose wives entered the imperial family. This difference became increasingly important as the number of male members declined. By the beginning of the 21st century, the imperial family faced a serious question about succession. Crown Prince Naruhito and Crown Princess Masako had one child, Princess Aiko. Prince Akishino and Princess Kiko had two daughters, Princess Mako and Princess Kako. For decades, no boy had been born into the family. Because the law allowed only male descendants in the male line to succeed, the absence of a young male heir created uncertainty. The government considered revising the law to permit a woman to become emperor, and perhaps to allow succession through the female line. Historical precedent existed for reigning empresses, but the modern law was male only, and those historical empresses had belonged to the male line of imperial descent. The debate was complex and emotional. Some people emphasized equality and the need for a stable future. Others argued that male line succession was essential to the character of the dynasty. Then, in 2006, Princess Kiko gave birth to a son, Prince Hisahito. He was the first boy born into the imperial family in 41 years. His birth reduced the immediate pressure for legal change, but it did not remove the underlying problem. The official family remained small, and female members continued to leave when they married commoners. As Emperor Akihito grew older, another question emerged. The imperial house law did not provide a general procedure for abdication. In earlier centuries, emperors had often retired, but modern law assumed that an emperor would reign for life. Akihito was increasingly concerned that age and declining physical strength might prevent him from carrying out his duties fully. In a rare video message in 2016, he spoke carefully about his understanding of the symbolic role and the difficulty of reducing its responsibilities while remaining emperor. He did not directly demand abdication because the emperor cannot involve himself in political decisions, but the meaning of his message was clear. The government and the Diet responded with special legislation applying to him alone. On April 30th, 2019, Emperor Akihito abdicated. It was the first imperial abdication in about 2 centuries. The Heisei era ended. Akihito became Emperor Emeritus, and Michiko became Empress Emerita. The next morning, their eldest son took the throne. The transition was orderly and peaceful. It joined ancient ceremony to modern law and personal human limitation. An emperor had asked, in the only constitutional way available to him, whether the institution could adapt to age. The state answered yes, but only through a special measure. Akihito's reign left a model of symbolic service based on remembrance, travel, listening, and closeness to the people. His son, Naruhito, would inherit that model, along with the ancient regalia, the constitutional duties, the family's long traditions, and the unresolved questions of succession. Emperor Naruhito was born on February 23, 1960. As the eldest son of Crown Prince Akihito and Crown Princess Michiko, he grew up knowing that he was expected one day to become emperor. His personal childhood title was Prince Hiro. His upbringing combined tradition with some of the changes introduced by his parents. He lived within the imperial household, but he experienced a more direct family relationship than many earlier heirs had known. He attended Gakushuin, the school long associated with the imperial family and the former nobility. Later, he studied history at Gakushuin University. His academic interest focused on transportation and waterways in medieval Japan. This might sound like a narrow subject, but it became part of a much wider, lifelong concern with water. Water connects communities. It supports agriculture, trade, health, and daily life. It can also bring flood, disaster, conflict, and displacement. Naruhito studied at the University of Oxford in Britain, researching the history of transport on the River Thames. His time abroad gave him an unusual period of relative independence and direct experience of life outside Japan. He later wrote about those years with warmth, recalling study, travel, friendships, and ordinary experiences not easily available within the protected structure of the imperial household. Over time, his research interests expanded from historical waterways to global water issues. He spoke at international forums about water, sanitation, disasters, and sustainable development. He served in honorary roles connected with the United Nations and gave lectures on the relationship between people and water. This scholarly interest became one of the most distinctive features of his public life. In 1991, he was formally invested as Crown Prince. The question of marriage had already become a matter of national attention. Masako Owada was born in 1963 into a diplomatic family. Because of her father's work, she spent parts of her childhood abroad. She studied at Harvard University and later at Oxford, and she entered Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was intelligent, multilingual, internationally experienced, and developing a diplomatic career. Naruhito met her in the 1980s. She initially hesitated to enter imperial life, with its restrictions and intense expectations. Their engagement was eventually announced, and they married in June 1993. The wedding procession drew large crowds. Masako became crown princess and, like Michiko before her, a commoner who married the heir to the throne. Many people hoped that her education and diplomatic experience would bring a more international style to the imperial family. But imperial life allowed less freedom than her previous career had offered. Her schedule, travel, words, and public activity were governed by protocol. She faced constant attention regarding the expectation that she produce a male heir. In 2001, the couple's daughter, Princess Aiko, was born. Her personal title was Princess Toshi. The birth brought public joy, but under the imperial house law, Aiko was not eligible to succeed because she was female. The pressure surrounding succession continued, and Crown Princess Masako's health declined. The Imperial Household Agency announced that she was suffering from an adjustment disorder. She withdrew from many public duties and received treatment over a long period. The situation opened a wider public discussion about the demands placed on women in the imperial family. Masako had entered the household after a successful international education and diplomatic career. Yet the role available to her was highly controlled and focused heavily on traditional expectations. Naruhito publicly defended her, saying that there had been efforts to deny her career and personality. His comments were unusual and revealed tension between the couple and parts of the imperial establishment. Recovery was gradual. Masako continued to appear at some ceremonies and events, but her participation varied according to her health. Over time, especially in the years approaching Naruhito's accession, she increased her public activities. Princess Aiko grew up largely outside the line of succession, but within the closest circle of the imperial family. She studied Japanese language and literature at Gakushuin University. As an adult, she began taking part in public duties. Her presence drew attention not only because she was the emperor's only child, but also because opinion surveys and public discussion frequently returned to the possibility of female succession. The law, however, remained unchanged. When Emperor Akihito abdicated on April 30th, 2019, Naruhito became emperor on May 1st. The new era name was Reiwa. The name was drawn from an ancient Japanese poetry collection, the Manyoshu. It was officially explained with the hope that culture would be born and nourished as people brought their hearts together in beauty. On the morning of his accession, Naruhito took part in the ceremony for inheriting the imperial regalia and seals. The sword and jewel, or ceremonial representations associated with them, were presented along with the state and privy seals as proof of succession. The sacred mirror remained at Ise, represented in the broader ritual tradition, rather than physically moved into the public ceremony. At his first audience after accession, the new emperor spoke of the solemn responsibility he had assumed. He expressed respect for the path followed by his father, who had prayed for peace and shared in the joys and sorrows of the people. Naruhito promised to act according to the constitution and fulfill his responsibility as symbol of the state and unity of the people, while turning his thoughts to the people and standing with them. The words connected the new reign to the post-war model developed by Akihito. Several months later, on October 22, 2019, the formal enthronement ceremony took place in the State Hall of the Imperial Palace. The emperor wore traditional court clothing and proclaimed his enthronement before representatives from Japan and abroad. Foreign guests representing 191 countries, organizations, and other entities attended the Reiwa succession events, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs material. The ceremony combined forms that appeared ancient with the legal framework of modern constitutional Japan. The emperor stood within the takamikura, the elevated imperial throne used for the enthronement. Empress Masako occupied the adjacent michodai. Officials in traditional dress moved through carefully ordered spaces. At the same time, the Prime Minister offered congratulations on behalf of the people under a democratic constitution. Court banquets followed. Foreign dignitaries were received. A public parade was later held through Tokyo. For Masako, becoming empress brought both greater responsibility and a role that made fuller use of her diplomatic abilities. She met foreign leaders and royal families with ease. Her knowledge of languages and international experience became visible assets. Her health continued to require care. and official statements remained cautious. But her participation in public life expanded. The imperial couple also inherited a reign shaped almost immediately by difficulty. The global pandemic disrupted ceremonies, travel, and direct contact with the public. Events were postponed or changed. The emperor and empress communicated through video and adapted some activities to new conditions. Even in this modern setting, the central themes of the imperial role remained familiar: continuity, presence, ceremony, attention to people during uncertainty. Naruhito's life had prepared him for the throne through history, international experience, and study of water. Masako's life had prepared her through diplomacy, education, and years of endurance within the household. Together, they represented a generation of the imperial family that understood both the world beyond Japan and the strict inheritance of the chrysanthemum throne. Their daughter, Aiko, stood beside them as a beloved member of the family, but not as an heir under current law. The future line of succession therefore passed not through the emperor's child, but through his younger brother. The emperor's younger brother is Crown Prince Akishino, whose personal name is Fumihito. He was born in 1965, the second son of Emperor Akihito and Empress Michiko. His childhood title was Prince Aya. Like his older brother, he attended Gakushuin. His academic interests, however, developed in the direction of zoology and the natural world. He studied at Oxford and conducted research connected with animals, domestication, and cultural relationships with nature. Over the years, he held honorary positions in organizations concerned with science, museums, and international cooperation. In 1990, he married Kiko Kawashima. Kiko had also attended Gakushuin. She had spent part of her childhood abroad because of her father's academic work, living for a time in the United States and Austria. Upon their marriage, Prince Fumihito received the title Akishino no Miya and established the Akishino branch of the imperial family. The couple had 3 children. Their first daughter, Mako, was born in 1991. Their second daughter, Kako, was born in 1994. Their son, Hisahito, was born in 2006. When Naruhito became emperor in 2019, Fumihito became the imperial heir. In November 2020, ceremonies were held to proclaim him Crown Prince Akishino. The official English title can sometimes cause confusion because he is not the emperor's son. He is the emperor's younger brother and first in the present order of succession. After him comes Prince Hisahito. The next eligible person after Hisahito is Prince Hitachi, the younger brother of Emperor Emeritus Akihito, who belongs to an older generation. This short list reveals the narrowness of the current succession. The family includes several women who carry out public duties, but the throne passes only through eligible males in the male line. Princess Mako, the eldest child of the Akishino family, studied art and cultural heritage. She took part in official visits and public activities as a member of the imperial family. She later became engaged to Kei Komuro, a former university classmate who was a commoner. The engagement and planned marriage became the subject of intense public and media attention. Questions concerning the finances of Komuro's family were widely reported. The wedding was delayed, and the prolonged attention placed great pressure on the couple. In October 2021, they married. Under the Imperial House law, Mako left the imperial family and became Mako Komuro. She declined the customary one-time payment offered to female imperial members when they leave the family through marriage. The couple later moved to the United States. Her departure followed the same legal principle that had applied to Princess Sayako in 2005. A woman born into the imperial family may spend decades preparing for official responsibilities, representing Japan, studying culture, and supporting public organizations. But if she marries a commoner, she becomes a private citizen. Princess Kako, the second daughter of the Crown Prince and Crown Princess, remains a working member of the imperial family. She studied at International Christian University and has undertaken public engagements in Japan and abroad. Her duties include attendance at ceremonies, visits connected with arts and social organizations, and international goodwill activities. Yet the same marriage rule will apply to her unless the law changes. Prince Hisahito occupies a very different position. As the only male member of his generation in the imperial family, he carries the future expectations of the male line succession system. He was born after more than 4 decades without the birth of a male imperial family member. His arrival temporarily quieted the political debate about permitting female succession. But it also concentrated the future of the dynasty in one young person. A family may appear ancient and immense when viewed through a genealogy extending across centuries. In the present moment, however, the official line can be surprisingly small. The post-war removal of collateral branches, the rule that women leave upon marriage, and the declining number of births have all reduced the size of the household. This creates practical as well as dynastic concerns. Members of the imperial family perform many public duties. They attend ceremonies, support charities and cultural organizations, receive foreign guests, and travel to regional events. As the number of members decreases and the remaining members grow older, these responsibilities are shared among fewer people. The question is therefore not only who may one day become emperor, it is also who may remain in the family and help sustain its work. Proposals have included allowing female members to retain imperial status after marriage, creating new branches headed by women, or restoring male descendants of former collateral families to imperial membership. Each proposal touches sensitive questions of law, tradition, equality, identity, and public acceptance. Supporters of female succession point to Japan's historical reigning empresses and to modern principles of equality. They note that Princess Aiko is the emperor's only child and has grown into a public role with broad popularity. Those who defend the present system emphasize the unbroken male line and distinguish between historical female emperors and succession through a female line. The debate often moves slowly because any change would affect an institution presented as a symbol of continuity. Change intended to protect continuity can itself appear to threaten continuity. This is one of the central paradoxes of the modern imperial house. It has survived because it adapted repeatedly. It incorporated Buddhism while preserving Shinto ancestry. It remained legitimate while regents governed. It remained sacred while shoguns ruled. It became the center of a modern empire during Meiji. It transformed into a democratic symbol after 1945. It allowed an abdication through special legislation in 2019. Yet every new adaptation requires care because the strength of the institution lies partly in the impression that it does not change easily. The present family therefore lives between two different kinds of time. One is the slow time of ritual, genealogy, and inherited form. The other is the faster time of modern society, with changing expectations about gender, marriage, privacy, work, mental health, and public accountability. Members of the family are human beings living inside both. Princess Aiko may attend a ceremony wearing formal dress and carrying the title of an imperial princess. She may greet members of the public and represent a dynasty of extraordinary age. Yet the law does not permit her to inherit her father's position. Princess Kako may perform years of public duties, but marriage could remove her from the institution. Prince Hisahito may pursue education and personal interests, but his place in the succession gives his life an unavoidable public meaning. Crown Prince Akishino and Crown Princess Kiko carry a heavy share of official work, while also standing at the center of debate about the future. And Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako must represent unity while remaining outside political controversy. They cannot campaign for a preferred legal solution. The decision belongs to the elected government and the Diet. The imperial family can embody the question, but it cannot constitutionally decide the answer. Perhaps the future will bring legal reform. Perhaps the present system will remain. The sources for this narration do not allow us to predict what will happen, and prediction would not be appropriate. We can only observe that the future of the world's oldest continuing monarchy depends, as it often has, on finding a path between preservation and change. The public life of the emperor is built from duties that are both repetitive and highly significant. Some take place within the constitutional framework of acts of state. Others are public functions, performed as symbol of the nation. Still others belong to the private religious traditions of the imperial house. The categories are distinct, even when they occur within the same palace grounds. Under the Constitution, the Emperor formally appoints the Prime Minister selected by the Diet. He appoints the Chief Justice selected by the Cabinet. He promulgates laws, cabinet orders, constitutional amendments, and treaties. He convokes the Diet and performs the formal dissolution of the House of Representatives when advised and approved by the Cabinet. He receives ambassadors and ministers from foreign countries. He attests diplomatic documents. He awards honors and takes part in ceremonies. None of these acts gives him independent political choice. The elected and responsible institutions of government make the decisions. The Emperor gives the constitutional form required by his office. This careful limitation protects political neutrality. An emperor may have personal thoughts, as any person does, but the office cannot be used to support a party, law, candidate, or policy. The emperor's public statements are therefore measured. They often focus on peace, gratitude, remembrance, compassion, culture, nature, and hope. At the opening of an ordinary session of the Diet, the Emperor reads a prepared statement. The elected representatives are gathered, and the ceremony marks the formal beginning of parliamentary business. At the palace, the Emperor receives newly appointed ambassadors. One of the most visually distinctive customs is the presentation of credentials. A foreign ambassador may choose to travel from Tokyo Station to the Imperial Palace in a ceremonial horse-drawn carriage rather than an automobile. The carriages are drawn by 2 horses and were made largely from the end of the Meiji period to the beginning of the Showa period. They are valued not only for ceremony, but also as artistic objects. The route through central Tokyo briefly places an old form of diplomacy within the modern city. A polished carriage moves along streets normally filled with cars and buses. Hooves sound against the road. Guards and attendants maintain the formal procession. The ambassador enters the palace to present credentials to the emperor. Only a few monarchies continue comparable carriage traditions for ambassadors, and many visiting diplomats choose the carriage when weather and circumstances permit. Inside the palace, audiences take place in formal rooms. The emperor and empress meet heads of state, monarchs, presidents, prime ministers, ambassadors, and distinguished guests. Crown Prince Akashino, Crown Princess Kiko, and other members also receive visitors according to their roles. These meetings support international goodwill, but they are not political negotiations. The imperial family represents Japan through courtesy, attention, and continuity. Conversation may include culture, shared history, education, science, environmental matters, or memories of earlier visits. State visits include welcoming ceremonies, audiences, and banquets. At a state banquet, ceremonial clothing, decorations, flowers, table settings, music, and speeches are arranged with great care. The event expresses respect between nations through hospitality. The emperor and empress also travel abroad at the invitation of other states. As crown prince and crown princess, Naruhito and Masako visited many countries. Emperor Emeritus Akihito and Empress Emerita Michiko traveled widely over the course of their marriage, and members of branch families have represented Japan at ceremonies, anniversaries, weddings, funerals, and cultural events. Overseas visits create relationships that sometimes continue across generations. A crown prince may meet another country's young prince or princess, then return decades later as emperor to meet the same person as king or queen. The official titles change, but the personal memory remains. The imperial household also exchanges letters and telegrams with foreign heads of state. Media may mark national days, royal birthdays, deaths, disasters, or important anniversaries. Such communication is quiet and often receives little public attention, but it forms part of the continuing rhythm of diplomatic courtesy. Within Japan, the emperor and empress attend events connected with agriculture, forestry, oceans, sports, the arts, science, welfare, and remembrance. They meet recipients of honors. They receive briefings from officials and specialists. They visit exhibitions and institutions. They attend ceremonies at which people have prepared for months for a meeting lasting only a short time. For the person who meets the emperor or empress, that short moment may become a lifelong memory. The imperial couple cannot know every individual story in advance, but their duty is to listen attentively. This quality of attention is central to the symbolic role. A political leader is expected to decide. A constitutional emperor is often expected to witness. To witness is not to solve a problem. It is to acknowledge that the problem and the people affected by it belong within the national memory. This is especially visible at memorial ceremonies. Each year, the emperor and empress attend the national ceremony for the war dead. They observe silence and offer words of remembrance and peace. They also take part in ceremonies connected with major disasters and historical anniversaries. The language is restrained because the emperor represents people with many different political views and personal histories. The aim is not argument. The aim is shared remembrance. The members of the imperial family also hold honorary relationships with organizations. They may serve as patrons or honorary presidents, attend anniversaries, and encourage long-term work in fields such as medicine, nursing, culture, science, or support for people with disabilities. These roles can last for many years, creating familiarity between an imperial member and a particular area of public life. Emperor Naruhito's interest in water is one example of how personal scholarship can enrich public duty. Crown Prince Akishino's scientific interests form another. Emperor Emeritus Akihito's study of fish showed that an emperor could make a genuine scholarly contribution within the limits of imperial life. The imperial women have also supported literature, music, traditional crafts, maternal and child health, and many social causes. Their work is often understated. There are few dramatic announcements. Instead, there are annual meetings, repeated visits, careful questions, and the steady maintenance of relationships. The imperial calendar is therefore not made only of great enthronements and weddings. It is made of many smaller acts. A document signed, a guest received, a ceremony attended, a survivor heard, a flower offered, a journey completed, a message sent after a disaster in another country. Through repetition, these acts create the visible life of the modern throne. The Imperial Palace in Tokyo stands on the site of Edo Castle, once the center of Tokugawa power. When Emperor Meiji moved from Kyoto to Tokyo, the castle grounds became the imperial residence and the symbolic center of the new state. The old castle did not survive unchanged. Buildings were lost to fire, earthquake, and war. New structures were created for modern imperial life. The palace grounds today include the private residence of the emperor and empress, ceremonial halls, administrative buildings, gardens, archives, and areas connected with imperial rites. The surrounding moats and stone walls still preserve the outline of the former castle. From outside, visitors often see the Nijubashi bridges, one of the best-known views of the palace. The name is commonly associated with the pair of bridges near the main entrance, although the historical use of the term has its own details. For many people, the bridges, the water, the stone walls, and the trees form the public image of the imperial center. Much of the palace remains closed because it is both a working institution and a residence. On certain occasions, however, the public enters designated areas. At the New Year and on the Emperor's birthday, members of the imperial family appear on a balcony behind glass and greet assembled crowds. People wave small Japanese flags, and the emperor offers remarks. The scene is modern, organized with security barriers, microphones, cameras, and timed appearances. Yet it also has the feeling of an audience between the monarch and the people. The palace is not the only imperial property. The Kyoto Imperial Palace remains deeply important as the home of the court for more than 1,000 years. Other villas, residences, gardens, and sacred sites are connected with the family. The Ise Grand Shrine holds a unique place because of its association with Amaterasu and the sacred mirror. Imperial tombs and mausoleums across Japan connect the living family with earlier emperors. The Imperial Household Agency manages matters concerning the emperor, the imperial family, and imperial properties. It organizes ceremonies and schedules. It coordinates official visits, audiences, press arrangements, transportation, security, household affairs, and the preservation of cultural objects. It also cares for imperial tombs, archives, traditional music, court ceremonies, gardens, horses, carriages, and collections. The agency contains both modern administrative offices and specialists whose knowledge belongs to older traditions. Someone must know how a particular ceremony is performed. Someone must maintain ancient clothing and objects. Someone must prepare a state banquet, preserve a manuscript, care for a carriage, arrange an audience, or ensure that the correct form of address is used in a letter. The continuity of the imperial institution depends not only on the family, but also on generations of people who carry this knowledge. Project can appear rigid from the outside. It controls movement, access, dress, language, timing, and public information. It can protect dignity and prevent political misunderstanding. It can also place heavy constraints on the people living within it. The experiences of Empress Michiko, Empress Masako, and former Princess Mako have all drawn attention to these pressures. The palace offers privilege, protection, and unique purpose, but it also limits privacy and personal choice. A member of the imperial family does not simply attend an event as a private person. The meaning of the institution travels with them. A smile may be interpreted. An absence may be analyzed. A marriage may become a national debate. An illness may require an official explanation while remaining deeply personal. The Imperial Household Agency stands between the family and the public, managing information and access. Supporters see this as necessary protection for a constitutional institution. Critics sometimes describe the system as too secretive or restrictive. Both views reflect a real tension. The family is public because it belongs to the state's symbolic life. The family is private because its members are human beings. The palace walls represent both meanings. They preserve a space for ceremony and residence within the city. They also create distance. Perhaps that distance is part of the quiet power of the place. A visitor standing beside the moat cannot see everything inside. The trees conceal buildings. The water widens the separation. The stone walls come from the age of shoguns, while the institution within them reaches further back and lives under a modern constitution. Many layers of Japanese history occupy the same ground. The castle of the Tokugawa, the palace of the Meiji state, the residence of the post-war symbolic emperor, the administrative center of ceremonies connected with an ancient sacred line. All of them are present, even when only water, stone, and leaves can be seen. Behind the constitutional ceremonies and public appearances is another rhythm, older and more private. The emperor continues to perform rites connected with Shinto tradition, the imperial ancestors, the seasons, and the harvest. These ceremonies are not acts of government. Japan's post-war constitution separates religion and state, and the emperor's official constitutional role is secular. The imperial rites, therefore, occupy a distinct sphere within the traditional and private life of the household. Yet they remain central to the historical identity of the throne. Among the most important annual ceremonies is the Nihonamatsai, a harvest thanksgiving rite. The emperor offers newly harvested rice and other produce to the deities, and then partakes of the offerings himself. The ceremony expresses gratitude for the harvest and connects the imperial household with the agricultural cycle. When a new emperor performs the first great harvest rite of his reign, the ceremony is called the Daijosai. The Daijosai forms part of the wider accession process. Special buildings are constructed for the ritual, and rice is selected from designated regions. The details are governed by tradition and carried out with great privacy. For modern observers, the ceremony raises difficult questions about where imperial tradition ends and public responsibility begins. Because the emperor is a constitutional symbol and the rites are religious in character, discussion has arisen over the use of public funds and the relationship between ceremony and state. The institution responds by maintaining legal distinctions, but the historical elements cannot be separated completely from one another. An enthronement is at once constitutional, dynastic, cultural, diplomatic, and sacred. Different ceremonies express different parts of that whole. The accession of Naruhito in 2019 showed this layered structure clearly. First came the legal fact of succession when Akihito's abdication took effect and Naruhito became emperor. Then came the ceremony in which the regalia and seals were inherited. Then came the first audience, where the new emperor addressed representatives of the people and stated his commitment to the constitution. Months later came the formal enthronement ceremony in the State Hall, where he proclaimed his accession before guests from Japan and around the world. Court banquets and a public parade followed. The Daijosai took place within the sacred ritual calendar. Each event had a different audience and purpose. Together, they transformed a private family succession into a national and international transition. Traditional garments played an important role. The emperor wore clothing associated with the ancient court. The empress wore layered formal robes. Members of the imperial family and attendants appeared in dress whose colors and forms carried historical meaning. The takamikura, the imperial throne used in the ceremony, stood beneath an octagonal canopy. Curtains, lacquer, decorative metalwork, and the chrysanthemum symbol created a carefully ordered visual world. The ceremony was not a reconstruction of a single, unchanging ancient event. Imperial ceremonies have developed across time. Some forms were revived, reorganized, or formalized in the modern period. But their purpose is continuity. They allow the new reign to receive the forms of the previous reign and pass them onward. The same is true of era names. Japan uses the international calendar in ordinary modern life, but official dates may also be expressed by imperial era. The Meiji era began with the reign of Emperor Meiji. Taisho followed, then Showa, then Heisei, and now Reiwa. An era name becomes a way of remembering time. A person may say that they were born in Showa, entered school in Heisei, or began a new job in Reiwa. Government forms, coins, documents, and personal memories carry the name of the reign. When an emperor dies or abdicates, a whole calendar changes. The transition is therefore both ceremonial and ordinary. A new emperor receives sacred objects in the palace, while people across the country adjust dates on software, documents, signs, tickets, and official systems. Ancient succession meets modern administration. The chrysanthemum also appears in many settings. It is visible on imperial standards, palace decorations, official objects, and the Japanese passport. The stylized flower has become so closely connected with the throne that the phrase chrysanthemum throne can stand for the entire institution. A flower is an appropriate symbol for a house that emphasizes continuity through repeated renewal. A blossom opens, fades, and returns in another season. Individual reigns begin and end, while the pattern continues. Imperial rituals also preserve relationships with specific sacred places. Ise is especially important because it is dedicated to Amaterasu. The emperor does not serve as a political leader of religion, but the ancestral relationship remains part of the imperial tradition. Visits to Ise often mark major moments in a reign. An emperor or member of the family may report an accession, marriage, or other event at the shrine. The architecture of Ise is itself associated with renewal. The principal shrine buildings are periodically rebuilt, according to an ancient cycle, with sacred objects transferred to new structures beside the old site. The practice shows that continuity need not mean preserving the same physical material forever. Continuity may exist in form, knowledge, and repeated action. A building is renewed. A ritual is repeated. A title is passed. A new person stands where an earlier person once stood. The Imperial House of Japan has survived through this kind of continuity. Not the stillness of an object that never changes, but the continuity of a ceremony performed again. Looking back across the full story, the imperial house can appear almost impossible in its duration. The traditional genealogy begins in a sacred age with Amaterasu, Ninigi, and Emperor Jimmu. Historical evidence becomes firm much later, in the early centuries of the Japanese state. Buddhism arrives and is incorporated. Female emperors reign. The court moves to Nara and then to Kyoto. Poetry, literature, clothing, music, and etiquette become forms of imperial culture. Regents govern around the throne. Warrior families rise. Shoguns rule from Kamakura, Kyoto, and Edo. The court loses practical power but preserves legitimacy. Imperial loyalists rediscover the political meaning of the emperor. The Meiji Restoration brings the throne to Tokyo and places it at the center of a modern state. The imperial institution becomes linked with nationalism, military authority, empire, and war. Defeat brings a complete constitutional transformation. Sovereignty passes to the people. The emperor becomes a symbol. Akihito and Michiko give that symbolic role a more personal form through travel, remembrance, and compassion. Naruhito and Masako inherit the task in a global and uncertain century. At every stage, something changes. And at every stage, something is presented as continuing. This does not mean the history is simple or untouched by conflict. There were rival courts. There were succession crises. There were emperors with little power and governments that acted in their name. There were periods when imperial ideology was used to demand obedience and sacrifice. There are modern rules that place unequal burdens on women and leave the future dependent on a very small number of men. Continuity does not erase these tensions. It carries them. Perhaps that is why the imperial house remains a subject of fascination. It is not merely a royal family whose members attend ceremonies and appear in photographs. It is a living institution in which mythology, religion, family, law, culture, diplomacy, memory, and national identity meet. The current family can be described in a few names: Emperor Naruhito, Empress Masako, Princess Aiko, Emperor Emeritus Akihito, and Empress Emerita Michiko, Crown Prince Akishino, and Crown Princess Kiko, Princess Kako, and Prince Hisahito. Other senior princesses belonging to the Hitachi, Mikasa, and Takamado branches continue to perform duties as well. Former princesses, such as Sayako Kuroda and Mako Komuro, now live as private citizens after marriage. But behind these present lives is an immense genealogy of sovereigns, consorts, princes, princesses, regents, monks, poets, warriors, and officials. Some are known through rich records. Some survive mainly as names. Some belong to mythology. The family is both very old and very small. Its public image is formal, but its recent history is filled with human concerns: marriage, education, illness, aging, parenthood, loss, and the wish to live with dignity under public attention. Empress Michiko entered the household as a commoner and endured intense criticism. Empress Masako left a diplomatic career and struggled with adjustment and pressure. Emperor Akihito confronted the limitations of age and sought a way to step down responsibly. Princess Mako chose marriage and private life under extraordinary scrutiny. Princess Aiko grew into public service while remaining excluded from succession. Prince Hisahito grew up as the only young male heir of his generation. These are not ancient symbols. They are people living now within ancient symbols. The future of the institution will depend on laws made by elected representatives and on choices that cannot yet be known. Will women be allowed to retain status after marriage? Will a woman one day be permitted to inherit the throne? Will former collateral branches be reconsidered? Will the family's public work be reorganized as its membership declines? The answers remain open. What can be said is that adaptation has always been part of survival. The Imperial House adapted when Chinese political and religious ideas entered Japan. It adapted when the capital moved. It adapted to regency and military government. It adapted to modern constitutional monarchy. It adapted, after war, to popular sovereignty and symbolic status. The question is not whether the institution has changed. It has changed many times. The question is, which changes can be understood as faithful to its deepest continuity? For some, that continuity lies in the male line. For others, it lies in the direct family of the reigning emperor and in public acceptance. For still others, it lies in the rituals, cultural duties, and symbolic service rather than in a particular rule of succession. A national debate must eventually weigh these meanings. The imperial family itself waits within the Constitution, performing its duties while the political system considers the future. And now, as our story begins to return to the quiet palace in Tokyo, we can let the many centuries settle gently behind us. The sacred mirror remains associated with Ise. The sword remains associated with Atsuta. The jewel remains with the imperial household. The old chronicles still tell of Amaterasu leaving the cave and bringing light back to the world. The traditional genealogy still begins with Jimmu. The historical record still becomes clearer many centuries later. Kyoto still holds the memory of the court that lived there for more than 1,000 years. Tokyo still carries the stone walls and moats of the shogun's castle around the palace of the emperor. The Diet still meets under a constitution in which sovereignty belongs to the people. The emperor still opens its sessions without governing its decisions. Ambassadors still enter the palace to present their credentials. On some days, a horse-drawn carriage still moves through the modern streets. At memorials, flowers are still offered. At harvest rites, rice is still presented with gratitude. At the beginning of a reign, old garments are worn, and old forms are repeated. And at public appearances, families still raise small flags as the emperor and empress step onto the balcony. The institution lives through these repeated moments. Not every moment is dramatic. Most are quiet. A careful bow, a few formal words, a document received, a journey made, a person listened to, a tradition handed forward. Perhaps the history of the Imperial House of Japan is best understood not as a straight line, but as a long river. The river begins beyond the reach of clear records, in mountains of myth and sacred memory. It passes through early kingdoms and ancient capitals. Other streams join it from Buddhism, China, Korea, warrior culture, Western constitutional thought, modern science, and democratic law. At times, the river narrows. At times, it divides. At times, powerful governments build beside it and direct the life of the country while the imperial current continues more quietly. The water changes from moment to moment, but the river keeps its name. Emperor Naruhito, who has spent much of his scholarly life thinking about water, may appreciate the meaning of such an image. But we do not need to assign the image to him. We can simply let it remain with us tonight. A long river moving through darkness. Moonlight appearing on its surface for a moment. Old bridges crossing above it. Cities growing along its banks. Generations arriving and departing. And somewhere, far downstream, the water entering a future landscape that no one in the past could have imagined. The Imperial House has moved through such a landscape for many centuries. Its oldest stories speak of sunlight. Its court culture treasured moonlight, blossoms, snow, and autumn leaves. Its modern role asks it to stand with people through war, disaster, recovery, and change. The throne is called the chrysanthemum throne, but the flower is not made of stone. It is delicate. It requires renewal. Its form is preserved through living petals arranged around a center. Perhaps that, too, is a quiet image of continuity. There is no need now to hold all the names and dates in your mind. You do not need to remember which ceremony followed which, or which branch stood next in the line. You can allow those details to drift away. The palace walls remain beside the moat. The lights of Tokyo reflect in the water. The city continues around the quiet grounds. Somewhere beyond the visible gates, schedules are prepared for another day. A ceremony may be waiting. A visitor may arrive. A letter may be signed. A garden may be changing with the season. And the long story of the Imperial House continues, one measured day at a time. For now, there is nothing more you need to do. You can let the centuries grow distant. Let Kyoto's palace corridors fade into the night. let the sound of the carriage become softer along the road. Let the pages of the old chronicles close. Let the mirror hold only a quiet light. And if sleep has already come close, you may simply follow it. The story will remain here. The river will continue, and the night can become still.